We are going to look at clay in the brick and tile industry. As I said, an emphasis on operations in Iowa. Um, just because I'm based in Iowa and I'm modeling a couple of brick plants, and right now I'm trying. What am I trying to do here now? Oh, I need to move this out of the way over here. Here we go. This will work. That's what I want to do. Hide some faces so I can see what I'm doing. All right, now I think all of us probably as kids made things like mud pies by mixing water and dirt and you know, then if we got real fancy, we got a box and we started making, bricks, but adobe bricks is literally is just water, dirt, if you get clay and sand, you get a good strong brick. Uh, you get a box that you put all that wet stuff in and then you shape it and dump it out and let it dry in the sun and you have an adobe brick. In some locations, they use manure along with the clay and the water to get a mixture. So, um, but let's move on. Clay bricks, the early ones, are naturally dried in the sun, or later we developed kilns for firing the brick that made it stronger. The brick strength depends also on the type of clay being used as well as the heat that's used in the kiln. If you're doing something like a fire brick that would be used in fireplaces or locomotive fireboxes or whatever, you're wanting a higher temperature and a little bit different clay mixture to get that super hard type of brick. I got up here in the corner is a common brick mold used for making soft mud bricks. And then down here, this is a manual machine for making one brick at a time with a press, and I have used one of these on a mission site where the church has gone in to, help construct houses or schools or church buildings and stuff, and using basic materials that are on hand, water, clay, straw, put it in here, press it down, and you get a brick that pops out. So now in Iowa, clay products have been around for many, many years, and I discovered a survey that calculated about 1900 there were 380 different brick and tile works around the state that they were burning coal to fire the clay products. And most of it was going into making drainage tile, along with the bricks, sewer pipe, and what we call structural building tile, or what I just call clay tile. 380 in 1900. Today, there are only two active brick productions in Iowa, and they are both owned by the same company, one in Adel, Iowa, outside of Des Moines, and one in Sioux City. You got a couple of ads for a couple of the Des Moines capital city company out of Des Moines, and then we have just a rendering or drawing of what a kiln looks like. Now, after the Naperville event, I got a comment from somebody who said, I need some geographic help. And so here's a map of Iowa with all the different counties noted. Des Moines, the capital city, is here. We'll be looking at brickworks around here. Cerro Gordo up here. This is where Mason City is. There are a number of brickworks around there. Um, Down in Mahaska County, this area, the Des Moines River kind of flows this direction, and then the Raccoon River comes in from over here. And in the river valleys are where we find clay deposits. And so you have brickworks all up and through and then scattered throughout all the rest of the state as well. But that might help give you a little orientation. The other thing is you often found coal, particularly in southern Iowa, in the Des Moines River Valley, you also found coal deposits. And so clay and coal are the two main ingredients that help you make and then fire the bricks. So let's look at a brick kiln. Here's a rendering showing you a kiln. They typically are rounded and domed. You stack up your clay products in the middle, and then there are fire pits all the way around the dome. And you build fires in there, and you let the hot air circulate through. And then there's a underground duct that this is all slatted floor here, and the underground duct goes to a chimney, and the chimney is built to draw the air from the firebox through the kiln and out. And that's how you fire the brick is the term they use. And the fire pits typically are fired by coal. In later years, natural gas came into use to fire the kilns. Here is a couple of brick kilns, actual ones that are being fired. You can see the fire there in the firebox. You can see the coal and the shovel there. You can see the large entryway that has been bricked up or closed off. And that's how you would go in to put in your green clay bricks and then remove the fired bricks. This one is a more modern setup. It's got a big fan up here blowing air through to help move that hot air around. So brick sizes, that a wide variety of sizes. What we know is pretty much the standard brick is essentially 4 by 8 inches and about 2 2/3 inches high. Here you can see all the different sizes. Here is a sketch showing the different styles and types of brick, including the large jumbo bricks down here in the corner. And you can see, um, the standard 8-inch length, and then we get into like the 12-inch length. I live in a house that's been built with 12-inch clay brick. It's a light cream colored brick. So this is a short film. I got several short video clips showing an operation in Toronto, Ontario, at about 1925. And there you can see their kilns, the stacks of brick and drain tile. And then here we got but now we're at the clay pit with the shovel. And this guy runs the trip lever. It dumps it right into the cart. Then he hops out, fires up the locomotive, and hauls this off. Now let's see if we can get the next video. This was a black and white or a silent film with a lot of words on screen, which I've eliminated, and we'll see if we can get this to work. They take the clay from the pit into a production building where they mix it. This is where they mix the water and maybe the sand or and straw and other ingredients to get the type of mixture they want. So here we can see them dumping the side dump carts. Ah, now let's look at some various brick and tile operations. This is Capital City Brick and Tile in Des Moines. It's probably over in the Raccoon Valley area. This photo is about 1890, based on, we got a boxcar here with the Burlington route, but it's got the lettering for its whatever railroad that was. So here's another shot. This is Iowa Pipe and Tile, also in Des Moines. I don't know if there were so many different names gathered through the years, whether these were the same operations with different names, but noticed all the pipe laying around from very large sewer pipe to we got stacks of drain tile. You notice the pipes down here, the curved pipes, etc. These down in front are sewer pipes because they have a bell on the end. And that would allow you to stick one pipe into the bell and connect them and then seal that joint so the sewage wouldn't leak out. Whereas with drain tiles do not have a bell. You just lay them in your trench and the joint is not sealed, and that's how the water seeps in to be drained away. And you can see the kilns here. You can see a conveyor coming up from probably out of the clay pit, and you see another, that may be an overhead bridge going over the river or pond. So we'll see a lot of that. Here's the clay pit itself in operation. Again, you're very close to the plant because there's the brick kilns and here's the pipes. So they built right next to their clay supply. So they don't have to move the clay very far. Notice we have a little four-wheeled, looks like a cart, and there's a cable that will be pulling it up this railway up to the production building. I gotta get my mind working here. What am I talking about? Here's another operation in Des Moines, the brick, and notice these are not round kilns, but they are rectangular shape with chimneys built right into the kilns, and we got 2 openings going in. There's a whole string of them here. So here's another shot of the Des Moines Brick Company. Notice the operators, Martin Flynn and S.A. Robertson, but notice how these are, just look how many chimneys there are. This was a large operation. So now here we are. This is looking at the Robertson's Brickyard. So Robertson probably had, maybe he bought it out later, renamed it, I don't know, but we're seeing some of the clay pits here, one of the chimneys. You can see all the kilns down in here. So this is a steam shovel from a Barnhart um, steam and I can't read all that, but anyway, steam operated shovel in the clay pit. This is basically how they would go in and dig the clay, and this would be on rails. So it would move from location to location as needed. This is, I've collected a lot of these photos. This is a little bitty operation just east of Des Moines along the Des Moines River at a place called Hasty, Iowa, between Des Moines and Runnels, actually. There was the granite brick factory. This is their team, and they had, as you can see, several kilns. All that's left of Hasty, Iowa is a T intersection of two gravel roads. So I don't know how big this operation is. I'm going to have to drive up there and see if there's anything around. So here we are. This is the Flint Brick Company, their clay pit in operation. Flint Brick was a paving brick company, and you find early streets in Des Moines were built and lined with Flint brick. So here's an ad for them, the Flint Pavers. They've stood the test of time, and their headquarters building was downtown Des Moines Equitable Building. This is the Platte Fire Brick Company. This is Dallas County, which is just west of Des Moines, the next county over, the Raccoon River Valley. A lot of clay and clay suitable for fire brick. This is the Raccoon Valley Van Meter, Iowa, which is in Dallas County, just west of the last one. And this says Platte Brick Kilns, so you can see the kilns in here and the stacks of finished product. This is a Redfield Brick and Tile. Redfield is in the next county on west of Dallas County, which is where Adel is located. You're getting a geography lesson here as well, but large brick operation, and this, of course, their employees there. So I don't know, did someone have a question or comment? What was that, Tim? I don't hear you. We'll move on. Here's another shot at the Dallas County Brick and Tile Works. This is Adel, Iowa. I believe that means it's 1911. You can see the gonds coming in here on rails, the horse-drawn wagons there. You can see all the drain tiles stacked up everywhere. And here's some structural tile or building block tiles. So here is Adel Brickyard just a couple of years ago. This is one that's still in operation, and they are located on the Brickyard Road is their address, and that's Old Highway 6 going through Adel. But that's their address, Brickyard Road. So you see now they're stacking up the bricks are stacked up, they're banded, they got a little paper there to protect them. And then notice the holes at the bottom. This is where forklifts can stick their forks through there, and because they got a metal band around them, they can pick up that whole stack of brick and move them around. This is a shot up in the Sioux City brick operation, I think at Sergeant Bluff. And what we've got in the background is what you call green brick. This is just formed coming out of the molds and stacked up to go into the drying shed. And they're on large platforms that are on wheels, and they shove the whole platform into a drying shed and let those green brick dry down. And then once they've been in there for a period of time, they will then move them from the drying shed into a kiln. And when they come out of the kiln, they're this nice hard red color, or the color varies on the clay or additives they might add to the clay to get various colors. So, and this facility today is now using robots to place the bricks, pop them out of the molds and place them on this floating platform, kind of like in a transfer table in railroad talk. So let's go back in the world here a little bit. The Lehigh Sewer Pipe and Tile Company, Fort Dodge, Iowa. And you see all the different products that they advertise. This is a paperweight, but vitrified wall coping, vitrified clay, this vitrified salt glaze, if I'm pronouncing that right, is fired at a higher temperature to get a harder surface. Salt glaze would give, just like any pottery, would give us a smoother surface, or so that it was impervious to water. And something like a vitrified salt glazed tile, here it's being used for drain tile, but it also might be used for building a dairy barn or something similar where you want to be able to clean it easily. You got flue linings for chimneys, you got septic tanks parts, you got gutter pipe and etc. This is the Lehigh Brick and Tile Company. This sat about 8 or 10 miles south of Fort Dodge, and about a mile or so outside of Lehigh itself. Lehigh was right on the Des Moines River, so this was about a mile west or two. And see, we got a string of boxcars in here. This was, I believe, served by the Fort Dodge, Des Moines, and Southern in urban line. Is that correct, Bob? Here's another. I got a lot of pictures of Lehigh Brick and Tile. Someone saw me do a test run of this and sent me a bunch of photos they'd scanned out of the Fort Dodge Library. So, but this was a large operation, lots of kilns, lots of chimneys, and these are square chimneys, not round, lots of pipes. This is an earlier photo. You can see stacks and stacks of coping tile and roofing tile and sewer pipe and brick and building block. It just very large operation here. Another shot, you can see all the employees standing up on the chimney flues here, and we got large sewer pipes here, and we got smaller drain pipes in the back. You can see the rail lines coming through there for loading. This would be typically loaded in box cars. They would pack straw around the product to hopefully keep it from getting damaged and ship it out. But the brick industry of shipping rail this ran about a 30% loss rate due to damage from hump yards, etc. So here is the Lehigh, their clay pit and one of their shovels there, and you can see a pile of broken pipe. This would be the rubble that even in the processing and handling a lot of product got busted up. So another shot at Lehigh Clay and Tile Works. Yet another one, you can see the hillside where they're digging the clay out. This is looking down from the hillside, see the tracks there. And this is their crew. And what's interesting, I want you to note down here, I've cropped the photo a little bit, but it says this is Grandpa Stevens right here. And he was a member of the crew, and you can see some of the pipes. Well, here we have another photo, again with Grandpa Stevens. He's leaning up against the wall now, and you can see the kilns in the background. So some family photos got donated to the Fort Dodge Library, I would say, which was nice. Here's an aerial view of the Lehigh brick factory, now abandoned. There is someone on YouTube has walked through here, and if you look for a brick factory YouTube video, you most likely will find one of someone walking through this whole facility, shooting the inside of what's left to it, including machines and equipment and things that are, here's an abandoned end loader. You can see a kiln here and some others that have been destroyed. So here's another shot of that area. And yes, another one. This is the Fort Dodge, Des Moines, and Southern Bridge coming into Fort Dodge from out of Des Moines. This was originally an interurban line, and this is the Vincent Clay Works here. This is a Don Vaughn photo. Here's another shot of the Fort Dodge, Des Moines Southern Bridge at Vincent Clay Works in Fort Dodge. So this is another operation in Fort Dodge. This was north side of Fort Dodge along the Minneapolis and St. Louis, which is right here, and then their siting along Soldier Creek. Here you can see the tramway that they bring the clay in from the pit over here into, this is a Sanborn map, so it's marked with the grinding room. And then we've got the brick and tile machine here where it's shaped and formed. And then this would be the drying sheds where they are set out to dry. And then they go from the drying sheds into the kilns where they are fired. This is the Sanborn map. Here is a photo of the Superior Clay Works at Fort Dodge. So you can see the Emmett St. L main line and the siding coming in here and some of the kilns and chimneys that are part of this operation. Halo is a town just south of Fort Dodge, also along the Des Moines River, and there was a large brick and tile operation there. And you can see the railroad tracks here and a retaining wall built with structural clay tile block, and of course the crew. There's another shot of their operation. You can see boxcars back here, the kilns, chimneys, etc. in the front. And just another shot of Kalo. This is after it's gotten abandoned, but you'll see they have a lowered track line in here with the concrete platform on either side, made it easy to load the boxcars with their product. One of their kilns, chimneys. They also had sand towers or silos along this is the M and St. L main right away here, and they had a means of moving the sand either in from the silos over to the brickworks with an overhead conveyor. But they had sand delivered here by the M and St. L. You can see a gone here and some pipes in that conveyor. This is looking from the other direction. This would be a shot of their clay pits. And of course, the water that goes with pits, some of their tile, brick kilns. This is the Kalo brick and tile. This is up at Colville. Colville is right on the south edge of Fort Dodge. Highway 20 bypass goes right through Colville. And the name, of course, comes from the coal that was discovered there. And so again, coal and clay go into making bricks. Colville is just southwest of the gypsum plants. For any of you who know Fort Dodge, there's several large gypsum mines up there with several different companies that make drywall, et cetera. But again, this is all in that area south of Fort Dodge. Here's their crew, including the four-legged members that were very important to the crew in the early years. This is a machine that is used to basically it slices the brick off as it comes through. I'm going to call it an extrusion machine. If any of you have ever played with grandkids and played with the Play-Doh, when you squirt the Play-Doh out through different shapes, that's basically what's happening in a clay production. They're shooting the clay out. This is a wired mechanism here that's a wheel. I'll show you here a little bit better. You can see with extrusion, the clay is coming out in a rectangular form. And as this wheel spins, the wire comes down and cuts through the clay and makes each individual block that goes out on the conveyor. Here's another variation of the same thing. Here's the extrusion machine forcing the clay out. And then this is a slicer that's a rotating slicer. And you can see it slices off the brick. So here is how clay pipe is being made. Go to the next, and here it is. You can see the wire cutting the clay pipe, and the fellows are then picking up and stacking up. This is the fresh clay, and it will pick up fingerprints and it needs to go into the drying shed. So let's see. This is the aerial view of the Kalo brick and tile works since 1961. You can see all the kilns in here. You can see this is all the open storage for all the finished product and the track coming in with boxcars waiting to be loaded. These would be, of course, the drying rooms, the drying sheds with the chimneys. So again, here's their sand and gravel pit north of Kalo along the Des Moines River. We got a steam shovel over here working away. This is their crew. I don't see Grandpa Stevens, so he must have stayed with the other company. Here are some more abandoned kilns and pits along. Webster County is where Fort Dodge and Kalo and Lehigh are all located. So these may be tied in with one of those plants. I'm not sure. They were not marked. So now here is a conveyor bringing the clay from the pit into the production building. We got a conveyor belt. Someone asked me how long that was. They could be any length they wanted, sometimes miles long for moving product if you've ever dealt with a conveyor company. And then you've got a walkway so someone could walk along here and make sure everything's working correctly or make repairs as needed. Um, Other operations had rails put down and they used mine carts instead of conveyors. And then a cable would be hooked to the mine cart to pull it up. This would be on an overhead trestle. So here are some more abandoned kilns. Here's a photo of the Fort Dodge region, probably from that bridge, looking down onto an operation, and you can see the gonds that are being used. Here we are inside the machine room where they're forming large sewer pipes, getting the bell formed on the end, and all the machinery there. This is in the kiln. This is pipe that has come out of the drying shed. It's now somewhat dry and somewhat hard. And you can see they're using a overhead uh, chain operation to lift up the big pipes and setting the smaller pipes inside, stacking them up so that they can all be heated. Um, they would be in here for about 48 hours because this has got, of course, got to be cold to go in and enter it. Then they would raise the temperature for up to about 1800 degrees, up to about 2200 degrees, depending on what they're firing, and then fire it for at least 24 hours at that temperature. And then you need time for it to cool down after the fires go out. So this would be in these kilns for a few days. Here we are looking at just another view. What I like is the old truck here with what looks like bags of sand or cement or something on it. Some old ties down in the front, and of course box cars over here. Here we can see an overhead cable apparatus, um, probably related to bringing clay into the, and we've got more overhead wires, cable here with a big hopper for receiving the clay. Here's one that looks like it's been abandoned and torn down in Webster County. This is the Vincent Clay Works. This is where the Fort Dodge went in Southern went by on the high bridge. You can see again stacks and stacks and stacks of round clay pipe drainage. I don't see any bells on there, so I think those are all drain field tile. Lots of early box cars. Here's another shot of the Vincent from the bridge. You can see we're up on the bridge now, but you can see the stacks of brick, et cetera, sitting out here after it's been fired, waiting to be loaded and delivered somewhere. This is, it gives a little bit better of the amount of pipe that they made, and of course the different types of block and pipe that they created at this Vincent Clay Works. And just another shot from the bridge. So let's talk about drainage tile and why was this so important? Most of northern Iowa was swampland or marshland. It was not the flat, valuable farmland that we see today. A reference here, this one reference I found said Greene County, Iowa has, and counties in Iowa tend to be about 25 miles by 25 miles. But they're saying Greene County has over 3,000 miles of drainage district tile and pipes, ranging from 4 inches up to 48 inches in diameter. But this does not count the private tile lines. Now, I'm not sure, but I'm interpreting private tile lines to be all the tile lines farmers put in their fields to connect to this drainage system. And so a farmer he's laying tile about every 20 to 40 feet apart in long strips through its fields to drain into these drainage tiles and pipes. And this is a photo from 1938 showing some the ditch diggers who were laying the pipe, and they got some pretty good sized pipe there. Now you may wonder, why is all this drainage tile important? Here is a map showing cropland in the upper Midwest that has drain tile. And the darker the blue, the more land is tiled. And so for you guys in the Indiana, Michigan area, you got, in Ohio, you got areas that have been drained off. Northern Illinois, Iowa, southern Minnesota. This is kind of what's known as the Corn Belt. So this is all corn farmland, and excess moisture is not good for corn roots. So we put drain tile in, we dig ditches to get rid of the excess water. So, and this is how drain tile works. You go down in here from 2 to 3 feet, maybe even down to 4 or 5 feet. You dig a ditch. You have a rounded bottom with your special shovels. You just lay the tile down there with the joints. That's how the water would seep in, and then it would drain off. This was all done on a slope, um, and they would slope it away. Uh, so let me move on here. Here's Boone County, Iowa. This is where Boone, Iowa was. They're installing field tile here in 1914. It's all done by hand. Look at the size of pipe they're going to be laying in there. Here we got a wagon laying out about 6-inch pipe along where they're going to be trenching pretty soon. Here's a fellow who's using a drain tile with a hook, but I want to point out here's his ruler board, so he knows how deep he is. So he makes sure he's got his, and here's his for lack of a better word, a chalk line. He knows where he's laying the tile. He knows how deep it's got to be at each location. You can see pieces of tile laying around, and of course the piles of dirt. Here's another shot showing a same operation. Look how long this fellow's spade is. And then you can see it's nice curve. He's throwing huge bundles of dirt up here. You can see one back here doing the same thing. Again, here you can see their line, their measurement tools. So they're getting a nice, even, smooth tile line through here. And it's got to follow a certain grade or slope to do that, all by hand. A little bit of later years, they created these tile laying machines. You got a wheel here that's set to revolve, and it's got buckets with teeth that will dig up that trench and then dump it off to the side. Here you can see a conveyor. The dirt comes up, dumps here on the conveyor, drops out. This is a steam-powered tiling machine. A little bit later, we went with more of a gasoline or oil powered. This one's got crawler tracks on it, but you can still see the digger wheel here and all the mechanisms. Here's one actually in work in the field. You can see that the wheel's been dropped down to the depth they want to go, and it's digging up and down, dumping dirt on the far side, and on the near side, you'll see the tile gets laid along here, and there will be a fellow following this machine, and he will be picking up tile and laying it down. He will be walking on it to press it in place. Tile's got bell on it, so this is probably a sewer line being built for this factory or whatever back there. Here's a field tile machine, same type of operation. This tile does not have a bell, but again, you see the fellow, he's down in the ditch. He's got protective panels on here to keep the ditch from collapsing. And he's basically walking on top of these tiles to set them in place. And the reason I know all this was I spent a day laying these tile pipes out along here. I had a fellow from the church called me one morning and said, "Do you want a job for the day?" And I said, "Sure." And he says, "Well, I got a guy tiling my farm field and he's short-handed. And can you come out and help?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So I learned how to lay tile. Never did it again. Not sure I want to, but I learned how. But again, he would be just setting these down, and then someone would be coming behind him with a blade or bucket or something, shoving the dirt back in on the tile. Occasionally, this fellow would ask for a special scoop shovel that had a rounded, that was the same size as this tile, a rounded bottom with a yoke on top, and the handle was attached to the yoke. And it was designed to slide along that ditch in the bottom and just scoop up any loose stuff and make sure that's a nice smooth trench in the bottom of that ditch with a rounded bottom to lay those tile in place. So I lived in Calhoun County for a while. That's where Rockwell City is. They had drainage ditches that were, some of them were 20 and 30 feet deep. And those were dug out with dredges like you see here and like this. So this is what those drain tile would dump into. And then this was dug so it sloped down to the nearest river. But that gives you an idea of how much effort went into drain the swamplands off. When I lived in Rockwell City, I heard stories of people's talking about their ancestors who bought farmland sight unseen, and then they got to Fort Dodge. The land agent took them to a rowboat to go see their farm because there were no roads. It was easier to use a rowboat. Um, and then they grumbled about the drainage tax they had to pay every year on each acre that was drained by these canals and tile and everything else. So they made good money because they had 200 plus bushel corn in this area, but they paid for it. So anyway, moving back to the vitrified clay pipe here, we see some very large sewer pipes being placed into a kiln using a stiff-legged crane. And here you can see some of the different types of pipe and the joints and the elbows and stuff. This is a kiln in Indiana. It's being filled with several different sizes of pipe. But here is a clay sewer pipe. This is called a tree trunk here because we got two lines that are coming into the main line. And you can see how thick the clay is, and this has been broken and chipped. And I can tell you that these edges are extremely sharp. You want to be wearing gloves if you're picking up broken tile. There's no question about it. And how did this get to become a tree trunk piece of pipe? Well, you had a lady who took two pieces of green clay tile, and there would be an angle and a hole cut, and then she's marrying them together using she's got a container of clay and water here where she's just using her fingers to form that joint. So, and this is at Rockford, Iowa, the Brick and Tile Works, and here's a crew of ladies during World War II. Many of them went to work in the brick and tile fields, and so they're working machine with drain tile coming off and stacking up on this rack or wagon, which will go to the drying room. So I'll move on here. Let's go now talk about structural clay blocks. This is a building block material. You can see it's a rectangular shape. It's hollow like a cement block or whatever. I lived in a house that was built, the whole foundation and basement was built with structural tile, clay tile, and then they had a brick face on the exterior. The basement leaked like a sieve. So, just so you know. Here's an example of a clay tile silo down in southeast Iowa. Here's an ad from a company in Mason City advertising their everlasting silo built with their Denison brand clay products. Fireproof, frostproof, lasts a lifetime. That's if you don't kick it and punch holes through it. So here's a chart showing you the different styles and types of structural tile that was made, and of course, again, the dimensions. And if anyone wants this, I'd be happy to share with you any of this information or particular slides. Just some ads again for clay silos, and here you can see one that's just been recently built next to this barn. If they got the glazed tile, then it was very easy to keep clean on the inside if you were storing silage in there. So let's move on now to getting the clay. Here's an interesting photo showing a team of horses with just a two-wheel cart that they're dumping in, coming out of the clay pit. Now they're dumping into a larger wagon where this team of horses will take the clay into that processing building. Here's an operation just south of St. Louis. This is a very large brick operation, clay pit where they make fire brick, and they're using mine carts on about 24-inch spaced rails, and we've got a mule here ready to pull the next cart into place once this one's filled. This fellow's using the latest in hand tool technology for digging the clay. This is an operation. This is in West Virginia. It's not Iowa, but they're mining clay underground, just like they were mining coal. But this is clay. You can see the cable pulling that cart out. Here's a fellow shoveling the clay into the cart. Here they are so bracing up the roof so it doesn't collapse on them, just like they do in the coal mines, but they're mining clay. And this is how they got it out. Now let's come back to Iowa. This is Sheffield, Iowa, Sheffield Brick and Tile, their clay pit, and their steam shovel. Sheffield, Iowa is one of the towns I've added to my layout when I expanded my basement. Um, and this is another way that they move clay. This is Mason City and Clear Lake, their electric clay dump car. Um, the Mason City and Clear Lake is the trolley, Iowa Terminal or Iowa Traction, depending on what year you want to talk about. And they had this fleet of dump carts, and they were the exclusive operators of the brick and tile works and the clay pits in Mason City. And so they would mine it. Later here, you can see they're using a dump truck dumping into the cart. They would then use the overhead wire to move the cart to its location. And Bob probably can tell us a lot more about this, but I'll just ask him to be quiet. We'll move on. Here's one with a load of clay. Here's one where it's tilted to dump the clay. So, interesting scratch building project for someone. Mason City had, oh, I don't know, 4 or 5 different brick and tile works, or they're all different names. Here's a Farmers Cooperative Brick and Tile. This is the American Brick and Tile Company. This is looking at one side, and this is looking across the kilns at the other side of their large building. Here's some more. You can see all the product lined up there ready to be shipped out. This is from the clay pit looking up at their buildings. And it's this is North Iowa Brick and Tile. It's got a different name now. This is Mason City Brick and Tile, Clay Works, Clay Pit, Mason City Sewer Pipe Company. Um, so, and here we are at Mason City, Iowa, North Iowa Brick and Tile, showing the machines inside for forming the pipes. And here is an operator with his extrusion machine pushing clay through. And here we are, you can see where there's the wheel for slicing off the tile, just like they would with the brick or the tile pipes, and they're stacking up there to take on a cart to take into the drying room. And here's what stacks of drain tile look like in the 30s. And they used miles and miles and miles of this stuff throughout northern Iowa and possibly shipped it up into Minnesota and other places. So here it is under snow. A couple more. And even colored photo postcards came into being to demonstrate all this, what was there. I like the wording on this photo, particularly on the building. A different shot of that same building. Here's again their yard. You can see the structural tile stacked up there. Somebody's loading up a truck with it, and the crew down here below. Happy crew. So let's move now. I mentioned this is southeast Iowa. What Cheer, which the town was served by the Rock Island and the Chicago Northwestern. Excuse me. You can see they had a thick layer of clay there with a ceramic quality, when they also had a seam of coal to fire their kilns. So they created chimney tiles, drain tiles, brick construction, and they also had a pottery works there, and they made pottery. Here's an aerial view. This is the Chicago Northwestern main line running down through the creek bottom here, and then this is their major building operation and the kilns and the storage fields. And here's a spur coming up with boxcars. And up in this corner right over here was the house where the manager lived. Here's another shot of their operation. There is a YouTube video. This production was shut down and pretty much abandoned, and a husband and wife came down. They were potters. And so they bought this and they lived in the house and ran a pottery operation. So, and the YouTube video was of her being interviewed a couple years ago with a lot of vintage photos, which is where I grabbed some of these. Here's one of the early photos that was in the video. That's a postcard. And here's of course where most of it's been abandoned. This is the house I'm talking about, that they lived there and they ran their pottery operation out of there and a couple other buildings. The road coming in from the highway is right here, and then the town of Whatcheer is just up here. They're just a mile or so south of Whatcheer. They get real leery of people coming in, mostly because of the liability with all these crumbling abandoned buildings. They're happy to share information about the property and facility. They just don't want you wandering around or driving through all the different roads. But here's one of those early photos I mentioned about when this plant was fairly new. This is one showing how one of the chimneys, they got the scaffolding rigged up to build the chimney for this operation. And of course, you have the standard. This is how they got product moved in and out of the kilns, was with these flat wheelbarrows. A lot of hand labor. This is the pottery works. One fellow spent almost his whole life working as a potter at this, running the potter's wheel at this operation, and they made vases and vases and statues and just all kinds of different pottery ware, as well as the large stone crocks or clay crocks of all different sizes. They were glazed, and so you could, make your sauerkraut or your pickles or whatever else you stored in crocks. Just another shot. This is 69, probably just before it was abandoned or shut down. Now let's go to Rockford. We saw a couple pictures from the Rockford group. This is a county historical society that's put some wonderful photos of this operation on their website. So here's an overall view. You can see the rails, trams going up into the building where the clay would be dumped and then mixed. You can see the cable. You can see a cart right here that they're filling, and then they'll pull that up. You can see the box cars, and here's a Rock Island gone in there. This is be on a Rock Island line, I believe, and the kilns and the chimneys and the pits that they're working. Here's another overhead view showing the operations. This was at one time a farm, but it looks like almost a dairy barn there that they're running their clay products into. And you see at least two tracks here where the railroad is serving, plus the platform where they stored all the product ready to be shipped out. Here we're looking in a different direction. You can see the clay pits back here, and the line bringing up, and of course the lines coming in. This is one of their kilns, the pile of coal again, and there's a stack of pipe that has been fired. Here we are stacking in the kiln. They were a little bit more modern operation when these photos were taken, so they had rubber tired carts. I at Naperville, I was guessing that Mont Switzer sold him used truck tires, and he just smiled. So, and again, I know this was a later photos, more modern operation, because here we got a roller bar, but they're rolling the pipe out and they're stacking it on pallets and then banding it together. So it's so this is well after World War II, where forklifts were fairly common in smaller operations like this. But during World War II, they had the ladies. And here's the crew, complete with their names. Vivia, Marlene, Susan, Betty. I can get the phone numbers if you want, but and here's a couple more. Obviously they enjoyed working there. And this is their loading platform. And Tony Custer and I would love to find somebody who is making or selling these long, long, high stacks of drain tile and brick, so that to go with our brickworks. But again, you got a raised platform here. They can run the wheelbarrows. You can see a plank right there loading a car. The kilns are right over there. More cars coming in there. And here's the delivery truck, and they're stacking up tile along a fellow's fence line. He's getting ready to tile a field, and so they're making a delivery. Marshalltown, Iowa, has a small brick yard. Here's a colored postcard showing it, and a drawing, a sewer pipe and tile. So as towns are growing and putting in sewer lines and water lines, again, the clay tile was a very important part of the process. And this is an ad they ran, sewer pipe, drain pipe, well pipe, wall copings, road culverts, etc. This is a Sanborn map of from Marshalltown, but it's showing the Red Wing Union Stoneware Company. But again, you can see their kilns and chimneys, their warehouse room for made out of hollow tile, their mixing room, and Red Wing was out of Red Wing, Minnesota, but they had operations in other places of the country where there was appropriate clay to make their famous stoneware. So now let's talk about the manual labor involved. This was a very intense hands-on operation. We've got some young lads here that they've got a clamping mechanism so they can pick up a variety of bricks at one time, and they're bringing them out to the drying field here and setting them down from coming out of the building. This fellow has got a load of fired brick that he's taking to a job site or work site. And I've seen some other photos with similar loads like this where they're just wearing those flat little sandals or thongs type and walking over rough ground. It's hard labor. That's a heavy load there, I can tell you. Um, a lot of bricklayers, they would have someone who used a brick hod, which is a V-shaped wood container here on a pole, and the backside is closed in so the bricks won't slide off when he throws this up on his shoulder to climb the ladder up to the scaffold where they're working and laying brick. Today they have modern hydraulic machines for doing this, but back in the day it was all hand labor. Of course, the wheelbarrows very crucial for loading and unloading kilns. A lot of the larger operations had rail carts here, and they were hand pushed or pulled by mules. This is a conveyor belt. Well, these guys, this is Pueblo, Colorado, where they're picking up the brick off of the conveyor belt and putting them over here on the carts that I'm going to assume going into the drying room, but I'm not positive. There's going into the drying room because here's a fellow pushing a cart up into the drying room, and this handle also functions as a brake, and I'll show you that in a minute here. Here we are. The stuff has come out of the drying room where it sat for about a week, and they're pushing it into the kiln. Then they'll have to take it all off this cart and stack it up in the kiln, as you can see them doing here. These are structural tile. Now, of course, once that comes out of the kiln, you got to load the boxcar somehow. Here we're using those roller conveyors, and they're stacking up structural tile, rolling it down. This guy's picking it up and putting it in the boxcar. Probably has got a helper in there that he may be handing it to. But and of course, if you go north Minnesota, they like to brag. Here we got a steam tractor and a whole string of wagons loaded down with tile going somewhere. Here you can see an operation, and this I love this little transfer table setup they've got going on. Notice how he drops the handle down, sets the brick. This fellow rolls out the empty cart. We lift the handle, release the brick, push it forward, set the brake. Excuse me, I said brick. Now he's running the cart with the stacked up tile in. And there he's, two at a time, handing them off to his partner in there to stack them up in the kiln. So and there we got our emptying the cart. And these guys are not really spring chickens, but that's okay. Now here we are firing the kiln up with coal. And my guess is they probably had someone on site 24 hours a day doing this while they were firing the kiln. Now, what's really interesting, this is how they closed up that opening in the early days. They just used broken, chunks of tile they had laying around and then just plastered clay over it. The later kilns have doors and hinges, but this is 1925. 1925. Here they are emptying the kiln. I can notice they're wearing gloves because they do have sharp edges, even though that's a hard-fired clay pipe or clay tile now. There we are, hauling one wagon away, another one's coming in. Notice the one horse watching the edge of the platform. Make sure he doesn't trip. Let's move on. Okay, here we are out in the yard where stuff has been waiting to be. Now they got an order to deliver. I want you to just see that. Let's play this one again. Watch him as he throws that one. These guys are also inspectors. If they find one that's cracked or broken or chipped, they toss it over into the pile of the refuse stuff. So, of course, with Naperville, I couldn't forget a shot of Naperville. There's a drain tile wagon in the Naperville area. Railroads were definitely involved in delivering these products. There's a straight train with 47 cars of paving brick going to Mississippi from Murfreesboro, Illinois on the IC. Now notice this is an early train because we got Fox trucks underneath these boxcars. So this is on the in Pueblo, Colorado, on the Rio Grande. They're loading sewer pipe. Notice this fellow with his hammer. He's putting in a couple of braces here in the opening, so the pipe he's already got stacked up won't roll out while he's waiting for a wagon load to come and fill the rest of the car. Notice there's also a stock car here. When stock cars were not needed for moving livestock, things like brick and clay tile, etc., were good commodities to use a stock car for. The water wasn't going to hurt it. So this is up in Red Wing, Minnesota, famous for their uh, crocks and pipes and stuff. And here you can see that glazed crockery as well as the sewer pipes and things, loading box cars. Here we are somewhere else. We got an early forklift being used for loading the larger pipe, then wheelbarrows for the smaller pipe off a brick platform, and then Pennsy boxcar here. Here's moving piles of brick. This is a modern way of doing it. Again, I mentioned the holes for the forklifts, and they make special hand trucks with these little wings or whatever that stick out, and there's holes so they can adjust these, move these to different locations that fit the different, whether it's brick or cement block or whatever, and one man could move a whole load of brick. Of course, modern technology, the Southern Railroad developed a special boxcar for brick loading with a reinforced floor and double doors so you could load bricks with the forklift. And you can see the forks aren't under here underneath the pile. They're stuck through the holes in that pile of brick. You really see this clear here in the supervisors, of course, and there you can see the holes in the pile. And they were loading the boxcar. They also developed some flat cars with bulkheads, again for transporting brick. You can see here they're using a crane mounted on the back of a truck for transferring piles of brick between truck and flat car. Here we're using a forklift for loading the flat car. And here's one that's loaded and ready to depart. Now, I mentioned Sheffield, and I'm modeling Sheffield. Sheffield, actually, this is just south of Mason City. Oh, what, 15, 20 miles, Bob? Yeah, nod. These are Sambor maps. The Sheffield brick and tile in the pink over here was on the Minneapolis to St. Louis. The main line ran here right underneath their trestle, their conveyor for their clay coming in, and then the siding in here. The one over here on the blue side, the blue one, this is the Sheffield Concrete Brick and Tile Company. This was on the Rock Island on the west side of town. Their clay pits were almost adjacent to each other on the south side of Sheffield. But here's a photo of the Sheffield Brick and Tile Work or Company, served by the Minneapolis and St. Louis. It's utter notoriety for those of us who are modelers This is where Tony Custer's father was the manager when Tony was born. And Tony spent 9 or 10 years growing up in Sheffield, Iowa, before they moved to Indiana, where his father became the manager of a brickyard in Indiana. And so, no, I knew that. And so when I realized I was modeling this, I got hold of Tony, asked him questions, and he said, I don't have much memory except for my father's office going there once or twice. So I sent him these photos. Here you can see the conveyor coming up out of the pits and into the processing building. And he loved getting the photos and shared them with his sister, who loved seeing them as well. So there's a little history for you. And this is the Sheffield Brick and Tile Company. And then here's an aerial view of the Sheffield Cement or Concrete Tile and Block Company along the Rock Island. And you can see they also have brick kilns. So they're doing clay as well as cement and concrete work. Here's an early shot showing their tile laid out there. And there's their conveyor coming up out of the pits and the water pumping away. So I'm building a model of the Sheffield Brick and Tile in a corner of my Iowa Central Railroad. Here you can see I'm starting on the clay pit. This is the main line, and the spur coming in to be where I'm starting to collect piles of brick and stuff. This is a building I picked up somewhere, and this is one of those Walther ones that I'll get around to building sometime. Doing a little bit more refinement work on the clay pit itself. I built the walls up a little bit. I now got stacks of brick and tile laying here. Again, I wish somebody would make got a couple of those Mr. Plaster brick kilns and some chimneys from Walther's. This is coming along. Now you see I've got some backdrop prints. I still need to work on getting this one lowered down a little bit, but it kind of dresses this up. This is a row of 3D printed sewer pipe. This is about 6 to 8 inches in HO, a nice stacked up on pallets. And I need to get back to the guy and see if he can maybe do something for me. Over here, I was getting ready to do some stuff, and I had a bottle of acetone that I was going to use to kind of eat into the styrofoam a little bit. And somebody set it too close to my elbow, and we dumped it over, and suddenly had a big pit over here. So I'm putting a stream in, a little bit of a dam here. We're going to have some kids swimming here with a no swimming sign, and then comes on down to the pond near the edge of the layout where the big hole was. And of course, I got a pump there. Here's a more down look on the pit itself. You can see there, and then this is some parts from a junk box. Of eventually it'll be a conveyor coming up. I picked up a couple mine carts this summer at the NMRA convention that will be used for going up there. And this is from a Michiana convention I went to, where I had to make a tree and use static grass, and that's just sitting there for the moment. So anyway, and here's my big pit and my river, and you can see the rows of brick and stuff. So you can get an idea what's happening in that corner. This, however, when I was at Novi, I got to go to the Qualman's layout, and this was Brooke Qualman, who does a lot of the structures and seating work. This was her clay pit, which she told me, I thought it was a gravel quarry until I saw the brickworks that she had built. And she was able to still get the Mr. Plaster kilns. And this is based on the brickyard that was in the town where her husband grew up. And they are pretty much modeling their town. But, here, and I asked her about that, and I said, do you have a pit? And she took me back to this and told me this was the clay pit. And so you can see the carts here coming up the tramway, probably pulled by a cable into a processing building and loading into dump trucks to haul it over to the brickworks. So that's an idea of how you can model, a couple ways. And so now someone has said, well, what about the products? Well, the N scale architect has a nice set of beehive kilns and chimneys as a kit. This is the Mr. Plaster one that later was model rail stuff. Both companies are now gone, but Scenic Express apparently has got their hands on some of the yellow brick ones. And they will sell them to you for, I think, $41 plus another $24 to ship it, because this is made out of plaster and weighs a ton. So And then Walters has got their plastic kilns. The blue pipes is the natural gas lines, but and they also have stacks of brick on pallets, and then have what they call a brick storage building. So you can buy these kits and use them to make your brickyard. Uh, Here's some Mr. Plaster stacks of brick that have been unpainted. And they also used to do tile, which are none of the, you find this at used swap meet type things. Scenic Express does have some of the tile in yellow, not in red. So that's what's available for modeling in HO or N. And this is the tile works at Storm Lake, Iowa. And you can see they got a couple dogs in here, wheelbarrows, stacks of pipe, the crew standing around. And I just want to thank you for listening. If interested, I do have about 40 more images of just a lot of brick and tile work, small ones around Iowa that give you a lot of detail, but we can also deal with questions. Or Greg, you can call me on time.
Very good, Doug. Thank you very much. That was really, really informative. Good stuff. Well, does anybody have questions for Doug? All right. Well, thank you again. And we are on for next week. We've got a few dates coming up in late November that we'll have to cancel for Thanksgiving and I think the week before, but we are good for the next 4 or 5 weeks, I believe. So if you'd like to present, let Ron or me know, and we'll get you on the schedule. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks again, Doug. That was really
Yeah,
nice.
Nice
happy to do
show.
it. Yeah.
Very good, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Uh-huh.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
good. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.